All right, good Tuesday morning to you. It's cold out here where we are. Alabama, you never know what's going to happen. So, yes, last week was all this like summer teasing us, and then today's back to winter. So, it'll warm up a little bit. But hope everything's good in your world. Hope you had a great night. I spent a little time on my illustrations for the book, trying to fine tune those and finish them up so I can get this thing off to print. So that's what we did. And man, today I'm looking forward to everything going on in my own life as well. Hope you are too. Let's jump into some truth today. We're in John chapter 18, and we are getting down to the trials. And so this is where we're going to be. This plays out like a movie, the way John writes it. So he cuts from one scene to another. So we're seeing two scenes unfold. Jesus before the courts and Peter on the outside and his denials. And so we're just going to see them play out like that. And so if you remember from yesterday, Jesus is, they have the cohort and the commander and the temple police, along with Judas, have all made their way into the Garden of Gethsemane, and they have surrounded Jesus. And in that scene, Jesus, just with the spoken word, tossed the whole cohort on their backside. Peter takes his sword, tries to strike a blow to one of the temple police, cutting the ear off. His name is Malchus. Jesus, his last miracle that he performed was picking up that ear, putting it on his face, and healing him. And so, at this point, Jesus says, "Listen, you came to arrest me. These men should go," and they all fled. And so that's where we find ourselves. Jesus alone being arrested. And so we'll pick it up in verse 12. So the Roman cohort, the commander, and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him and brought him to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was in their best interest for one man to die in behalf of the people. So here we go. Jesus has been arrested. He's been bound. That is, and I think they were a little afraid. Anyway, I believe Judas had told them that they should bind him. Judas, he lived with him for 3.5 years. You would think he would realize you couldn't bind Jesus, but at any rate, Judas had told him that. And so here's the setting. Now, it's the Son of God, the Messiah, standing alone in the Garden of Gethsemane, surrounded by 480 soldiers, potentially 100 others, as far as the temple police. The commander was a man who was in charge of 1,000, so he would have had two cohorts. He could have called another at any moment. And I think all that for one man. Amazing, right? I got to believe that they know something who sent them. They know that they are not dealing with an ordinary human. They know that. And I just think that should be kind of on record. The King of Kings, whose army of angels are at his disposal, right? He's already said that to Peter. Peter, don't you know I could call, I could call on the angels right now. I could call on legions of them, and they'd be here. So they've been told to stand down. Now, just to put things from a heavenly perspective and an earthly perspective together, there are 480 soldiers in this cohort, plus the, couple of hundred or whatever it is, temple police, however many they sent, we don't know. 500 people. One man who could have called one angel, didn't need a legion. One angel took to flight 185,000 men in the Old Testament. So we're like, this is not even a fair fight. If one angel showed up, it's not even a fight then, because one angel can handle 150,000, and there's not even there's not even 1,000 there. So it's amazing to me just the sheer perspective perspective of this world as opposed to God's realm in the kingdom. So they've dusted off their backside. They've stood up, and now they arrest him. So this is, and it says the first thing they did was they brought him to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was in their best interest for one man to die on behalf of the people. Remember that conversation earlier on? They're like trying to figure out, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And he goes, hey man, you know what? All I know is it's better for that one man to die than for all the people to see their lives go to waste. And so this was the conversation that had been had. Now, Annas is an old guy. He's the father-in-law, still holds the title of high priest. It's similar to what happens when, if we have a governor and then there's another one elected, you still refer to the one that's no longer in office as governor, right? That's just how you do that. We do that with our presidents, right? So we talk about President Carter. We talk about President Trump, right? These are presidents, though they're not in office. This is Annas. He's high priest, though he's not in the office of high priest at that moment. And so they send him there in this kangaroo court. That traditionally is where you would go, but not in the middle of the night. But that is where you would go. And it was simply an arraignment. They were looking for some preliminary evidence. That's all they're looking for. And in these courts, they were not allowed to question the witness themselves. Annas is trying to fast track this thing. Everybody's in on the take. They all knew they were going out to arrest him. They're all sitting around waiting on him to bring him in. So this isn't like, oh, you got waking up in the middle of the night. What's going on now? It's not that. No, this is all planned. And so, and Annas he's an evil man. Though he's a Jew, he's a sellout to the Romans. This whole high priest thing had turned into a circus at this point because they were bought and paid for by the Roman soldiers. So the Romans didn't like one high priest, which was how the scriptures had set it up. So they would just take a family and they would rotate them through. Annas, the father-in-law, Caiaphas. Caiaphas had brothers and sisters, brothers and also had some sons. And so I think there were like 3 generations of high priests in this family. But not to that aside, Annas was the one who had created the scenario in which Jesus turned the money tables over. He's the one who decided that they would have these tables set up. So if you brought your lamb in, and they would find a blemish on it, they could say, well, we'll take yours for a little reduced price, but you can buy this one, right? And so there was this money changing, and it was profiting the temple. And all they would do would take that one with the blemish, hide the blemish, throw them in the pen with all the others that they considered good and unblemished, and sell them. It was just a racket. And so Annas was the one who had established that. Now, that's as far as we get right now. We go to verse 15. It's the cutaway. So that's what's going on with Jesus. They've all fled, but Peter and another disciple have kind of followed along closely. Jesus has been carried into Annas's the courtyard of the temple, where all of the high priests would have kind of had. It's a weird setup. They all would have had their little condos or whatever you will. Their little houses would be all dotted around it. And so that's where they would be. Now, it says in verse 15, Simon, Peter, was following Jesus, and so was another disciple. Now, we don't know who that other disciple was. We can assume it's John, because John always refers himself to in that kind of a sort of way. He does that later on in the scriptures. And so he does that when after the resurrection, when it says Peter and another disciple. And the other disciple. So this is, for the most part, it doesn't matter really, but that we believe that's who it is. Simon Peter was following Jesus, and so was another disciple. Now the disciple was known to the high priest and entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. Man, the only one I know that stood by Jesus full frontal was John. Remember, he was there at the cross when Jesus speaks to him and says, "Mother, behold your son. Son, behold your mother," looking at John. So John was the only brazen one enough to just stand there. And so we assume that's who it was. He's right there with Jesus, man. He's following at the heels. Peter's kind of darting in and out. And so John walks right in because he knew the high priest, right? So it says, But Peter was standing the door outside. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. So he's like, hey, talking to the high priest. He sees Peter, too timid to come in. He goes over to the doorkeeper. Hey, listen, he's with me, right? And then they go. Then the slave woman, who was the doorkeeper, said to Peter, you are not also one of this man's disciples, are you? Now, also one of this man's disciples means that doorkeeper understood that the other disciple was a disciple of Jesus. So at that point, Peter wasn't alone. Peter could have said, well, hey, there's, they know him, so and he's okay. I guess I could be too. But man, Peter is overcome with this fear, and it's just gripped him. And so it says, he says, I am not. Didn't stutter, just, I am not. Now the slaves and the officers who were standing there, having made a charcoal fire, for it was cold, and they were warming themselves, and Peter was also with them standing and warming himself. So there he is. So he gets through the door because of John, or the other disciple. The girl goes, hey, you're also a disciple of his too, right? No, I'm not. He finds a fire, and he just kind of wants to get out of the way, but he wants to, he loves Jesus. He's not Judas. He loves Jesus. He's just afraid. Which is true of most of us. All of us, if truth were to be told. Now, and Peter was also with him, standing and warming himself. Now, we cut back now, verse 19. So that's his first denial. Now he's just scene set. He's warming himself by the charcoal fire with some other slaves and officers and others who were there in the court. Now, verse 19. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Now, he's not supposed to be asking those questions. According to the Jewish law, you were not supposed to cross-examine the witness. This is simply for the one who has made the charges to state their case. That's all it is. But this is a mock trial. This is a sham. This is a kangaroo court. Laws don't apply in this scenario. So nothing about this is fair. Nothing about this is right. It doesn't matter. Not in human. Hey, we see the same thing happening in our world today. It doesn't matter. Laws don't matter. They're just broken, right? By our own government. Same thing going on here. Now, so this questioning violates their law. But look what he says. Jesus answered, I have spoken openly to the world. I always taught in the synagogues and in the temple area where all the Jews congregate. And I said nothing in secret. Why are you asking me? Now that's not a tone of derision. Like, why are you asking me? He's like, why are you asking me? Ask those who have heard what I spoke to them. Do your job is what he's saying. Ask the ones that you should be asking. And he says, look, these people know what I said. He's looking around. He's going, even the ones here, they all know what I said, whoever has gathered there. But when Jesus had said this, one of the officers who was standing nearby struck Jesus, saying, is that the way you answered the high priest? Now, that strike there, in Micah is recorded, one of the prophecies, Micah 5:1 says that they struck Jesus on his cheek, that's what was going to go on, that he would be smitten with a rod on his cheek. And so we assume that this soldier didn't just strike him with his fist, but took that stick of his, that rod, and snapped it across his face. And so this is beginning to turn ugly quickly. But when he had said this, one of the officers standing nearby struck Jesus. Is that the way you answer the high priest? Jesus answered, if I have spoken wrongly, testify of the wrong. Right? Hey, if I said anything wrong here, then tell me. But if rightly, why do you strike me? At this point, Annas knows he's kind of broken the law and all of that, and he knows he's not going to get anything. He was hoping for a quick confession, and then they could just go straight to the crucifixion. So Annas sends him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest, which is his son-in-law, and so which is just around the corner. It's not like he's being dragged across the city. It's really literally in the same building, so to speak. So Annas sends him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Now, Simon Peter was still standing and warming himself. So now we cut away, and we're back to his second and third denial. And so we'll see that played by. It says, now Simon Peter was still standing and warming himself. So they said to him, you're not one of his disciples as well, are you? So now, first time, right? Just to get the scene clear, he's standing outside the gate going into this courtyard. And the other disciple comes and speaks to the doorkeeper, a slave girl, and says, hey, he's with me. Come on, let him in. And so he comes in, and as he comes in, she says, you're also one of the disciples? No. Finds a fire, standing there warming himself by while Jesus is getting struck in the face. And then it says this, so they said to him, you're not one of the disciples as well, are you? Now, could be that John is standing there too. We don't know. We don't know where he went. He may have gone into the court. We don't know. He denied that and said, I am not. One of the slaves of the high priest, who was related to the one whose ear, isn't this amazing? So all of a sudden now there's a guy there, and he goes, and he's already heard the news, man, Malchus' ear got cut off, and so he already knows that, who was related to the one whose ear Peter cut off. Did I not see you in the garden with him? So this slave of the high priest was actually one of them that arrested Jesus. And so since he saw his relative's ear cut off, he looks at the guy who did it. So he recognized the face. This isn't hearsay. Did I not see you in the garden with him? Peter denied it again, right? Cursing in that sense. And he says, and immediately a rooster crowed. Now, wow, okay. Let's, I want to read to you really out of a book that kind of tells about what's going on. Let me see if I can find it. It's where Peter is denied. A little later, Simon Peter stood warming himself. When the servant girl saw him, she said, now, I'm reading out of a book called The Gospel Interwoven, which brings in all of the gospel accounts kind of into one narrative so we can see it unfold. It says this, about an hour later, another asserted, certainly this fellow is with him, for he's a Galilean. Those standing there went up to Peter and said, surely you are one of them, for your accent gives you away. One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. Didn't I see you with him on the olive grove? Again, Peter denied it. He began to call down curses on himself, right? Like, hey, got to strike me dead if I did that. Man, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know this man. Now, this is what Luke records. At that moment, just as he was speaking, the rooster began to crow the second time. The Lord turned and looked straight away at Peter. Then Peter remembered the Lord Jesus had spoken to him, before the rooster crows twice today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside, broke down, and wept bitterly. So the way this story ends is Jesus is being moved from Annas to Caiaphas, and he's walking through the courtyard while all of these men are warming themselves by the fire. And Peter, having denied himself, even brought down curses on his own life, denied him. He hears the rooster crow. He looks, and Jesus and his eyes meet as they pass, or as Jesus passes. And Peter remembers the Lord said he would deny him 3 times. And then it says he broke down, wept bitterly, and ran outside. Couldn't take it. Now, that's how we're going to leave this today. How powerful of a story is this? This isn't like a teaching deal. This is just a story for us emotionally to be awakened to the reality of the brutality of our Savior's death, and to identify ourselves in somewhat as those who potentially could create the same sin that Peter did by just denying and lying that he knew Jesus. So a sober story today. Lord bless you guys. We'll see more of this tomorrow, and I look forward to sharing it with you then. Have a good one.